was like, no one had told me that I'd been exposed.
Stand by, please. Go ahead.
Good morning. Today is Wednesday, June 29th, 2022. Commissioners Court is meeting in special session. Would you please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation.
With liberty and justice for all.
Oh, okay.
Commissioner Stout has entered the meeting.
We'll be leaving the.
Okay.
What's that? Wait, she walked out, so there's no quorum, so. Okay.
All right. Judge, do you have any opening remarks for us this morning?
No, I think it's an amazing topic, something we've been waiting for and trying to understand a little bit better. I know the community, there's a lot of excitement about what we're going to do with our events and event venues, so look forward to it and look forward to any comments from the public. So thank you. Any more? We're ready.
Item number 3 is public comment. We do not have anybody signed up at this time for public comment, so we'll take no action. Item number 4 from the regular agenda. Discuss and offer feedback on the findings and recommendations resulting from the events and venue feasibility study for the County Coliseum and Amphitheater.
Judge, Commissioners, we want to bring this item back. Michael Hernandez with our Economic Development Department is going to present to you all on this today. As you recall, we did earlier this year receive the presentation from Hundon and Associates regarding this study, but at that time it was in a meeting where you had several other agenda items, and you asked that we bring it back for just another review and for feedback from the court. And I want to be clear today, that's what we're looking for, is to hear what additional information you want, anything else that we can do on this to help the court bring it to final decision as we go through this. We do believe, as we go over this again today, while the one thing I do want to share is while the consultant did offer a lot of public input and a lot of opportunities for the public to participate, I do think we've learned a lot through other agencies and their efforts to do significant improvements. And one of the things I would ask that we plan for in our timeline here is to continue to ask for more public input. We did those really organized opportunities through the consultant, but I think there's a lot of more organic opportunities we could provide, meetings in each of your precincts, and more opportunities for input and collaboration with our partners on this particular, both of these proposed facilities. And with that, I want to thank Michael for getting this put together and turn it over to him for presenting this today.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. Michael Hernandez, Economic Development Director for El Paso County. It's good to be with you this morning to revisit our study that was performed by the Hundon Strategic Partners Group, our consultant that took a look at the event venues in the region, as well as took a look at an analysis of our marketplace for events here in El Paso. They took a look at our market, the kinds of folks that are coming to those events, where they come from, how long they spend time here. And so there's a lot of valuable information that we gained from this study, including possible improvements to the County Coliseum, as well as a possible amphitheater to be added to Escalante Park. I'm happy to share some of these high-level concepts with you again. And what we can do, as Ms. Keller mentioned, our goal is to really listen to you about some of the things that you're looking for, additional questions that we can go and seek answers for, more information we can gather up with help from our consultants and other folks in the region. But as Ms. Keller pointed out, I want to be clear that this study was really built upon gaining a lot of feedback from our community, not just from connecting to stakeholders in the area, but also with engaging with the public. And in fact, during that initial kickoff visit in June, the group here and the county held our first in-person meeting during the pandemic. That was a hybrid meeting where we had folks come out to the County Coliseum. We had some friends from the Sports Commission help host that event, but we also had that online. And we were able to connect with folks about some of their ideas and some of their feedback about the kinds of improvements they'd like to see, especially at the County Coliseum campus. We took those into account, and as and I'll show you the process for the venue study itself, but we did actually follow up with another community event in November online to share preliminary findings by the group and get more feedback from the community. Whatever steps we take in the future, we want to make sure that we keep with that effort to engage with the community in meaningful ways. And in fact, if you all are looking to invest in improving both venues, we certainly want to make sure that we are as creative and open-minded about gaining feedback from the constituents in each of your precincts. I think Mr. Landeros and those folks, as they presented the NOFO for community organizations to take part in ARPA funding projects, really served a good example of how we can actually roll that out. We had community meetings in each of your precincts, and so we can actually do something similar to that. I thought that was a really impactful way to gain feedback from folks. So let me go ahead and start again with an overview of the study that we performed with that consultant. So as I mentioned to you, we kicked off this study back in June with a visit from Hunden Strategic Partners. They visited our area during the week of June 15th. And that study looked at a couple of places, as I mentioned to you. They looked at the 20-acre County Coliseum campus. And we're calling it a campus because the Coliseum property extends beyond just the Coliseum building itself. The Coliseum building, as the consultant pointed out, was built in 1945, initially as a bomb shelter, and that's notable for a couple of reasons. One, it's been in our community and the heart of many community events for a long time. Two, it's built as a solid structure. It was built to withstand bombs, obviously, and so the ability to reformat the space is somewhat limited. The ability to scrape it and build something completely new is incredibly cost prohibitive. And the consultants were able to look at that and confirm that, yes, any changes or improvements to the Coliseum are limited in some scope, but there are some changes that can be made to actually increase activity and bring more revenue to that space and El Paso County. They also looked at the Ascarate Park as a possible location for a proposed amphitheater. You all have been talking about what an amphitheater might look like in the area. And the consultant found some really interesting things that we'll point to later on as we continue the discussion. But really, our region lacks that kind of outdoor venue space that most communities do have. We don't have that large or mid-sized facility for outdoor music events or their community activities that you see, like the county fairgrounds, and Doña Ana is a really good example. When people go to the wine festival out there, they go to Doña Ana County's fairgrounds for that. We don't have something similar as a music venue that's an amphitheater that allows for seating and concerts and other kinds of activities that we think could actually be pretty impactful and bring people to what we know is the jewel of El Paso County, Ascarate Park. And so what we're here to do is to ask, as we look over these details again, for some guidance in terms of possible next steps as we consider possible improvements to the Ascarate Park, adding an amphitheater, as well as improvements to the Coliseum. As I mentioned to you, this is a unique view of our marketplace. We gained a lot of information about where people are coming from, how long they're staying, how much money they are spending as they come to these events at our venues. So that was incredibly invaluable. But I also want to take some time to thank each of you for your participation in this, as well as your staffs. Notably, I'd like to thank Judge Samaniego and Commissioner Stout for being with us as the group from the Hunden Strategic Partners visited us in our community back in June. You helped lead that effort to engage with them. And as they saw the venue spaces, we had a really strong push, a commitment to really dive deeply into what those improvements might look like, especially at the Coliseum campus. Additionally, we had some help from our friends at the Parks and Recreation Department. They hosted us as we visited Escalada Park that day. And we had some help from other folks as well, including the private sector. We had help with the Sports Commission, who laid out a list of longstanding improvements that they had identified as being the folks that help operate that venue for us. And we're grateful for that information. The consultant also received information about the kinds of events the commission had been pulling in and the kinds of impacts those events have had on our community. We've also reached out with stakeholder help to folks like the events and promotions industry professionals in El Paso so that we can understand what events look like here, what kinds of concerts we are already achieving, but perhaps what we can reach for as well was a really meaningful part of those discussions. And I'd like to be clear that once we engaged with some of those professionals and some of those stakeholders, which included people from the hospitality and tourism industry, we stepped back and let the consultant have those kinds of pretty upfront discussions with people so that nobody felt inhibited to let them know what was lacking, what was needed, but what was also meaningful in terms of improvements they'd like to see in El Paso. So we're happy about that process. We also, as I mentioned to you, had those two engagements with the public. The first one during that week in June, where we had that hybrid meeting at the County Coliseum, and the public was able to provide some feedback, ask questions of our consultant and us, as well as to provide more feedback in November when we provided those preliminary findings. So here is the process for the venue study, how their methodology for how they worked to build this study for us. As I mentioned to you, they started in June with that kickoff. During that time, they had site inspections of both the County Coliseum campus as well as Escalada Park with our Parks and Recreation Department helping out with that. We had that public meeting during that time to gain feedback and to kind of identify some of the stakeholders that they wanted to follow up with more meaningful conversations. They engaged with county staff sort of as a follow-up to kind of see what we learned during that first week, and then kind of sorted through next steps for the study so that we could understand what they were going to embark in, and to help gather more information and data for them as they rolled forward. They let us know that it was going to take about 6 months to really put this together, but we would be in constant contact letting them know what we're hearing and what other data that we were finding that we wanted to gather up for them. We also worked with our folks, the partners at the City of El Paso and Destination El Paso, who have some of that data, and we were able to give that data to those folks as well. So it was a pretty meaningful partnership between us and Hunden Strategic Partners to make sure that the information was flowing back and forth pretty steadily during that study. As I mentioned to you, we had that public meeting of initial findings in November of last year, and that was 2 sessions that we held on separate days to make sure that we provided people either at lunchtime or just a little bit after work a chance to provide feedback to the group. They then went and dove into some secondary research, source material, data, access they have to certain marketplace data that is pretty meaningful and shows us where we are in comparison to other communities. And then they engaged with us about what their findings really were showing so far. And then we basically refined that study to make sure that, one, it really hit some of the things that we were looking for, the questions that the court had posed to them about what we have already, and what we can actually reach for with helping to improve and activate our spaces in a better way. We made sure that the presentation that they offered us, the final versions, were both in English and in Spanish, so that we can make sure that engagement was as wide as possible. And then we presented to Commissioners Court, I believe, in early March, as was that Commissioners Court meeting. So they performed a SWOT analysis of each of the venues, and they identified a few things that were really interesting for us. The architectural foundation for the Coliseum was pretty stout. They mentioned, as part of the strengths, there's a strong identity with the Coliseum that most folks have in El Paso. They can remember going to some early concerts during their childhood or growing years, and so it's a meaningful place for a lot of folks. It also was the center point for a lot of community festivals and activities. The Fiesta de las Flores, people talked about when they engaged with the consultants. There's a strong relationship between the El Paso Sports Commission and event promoters to make sure that events are coming through our venue spaces. Some of the weaknesses, of course, were the flow in and out of the spaces was a bit hampered. The amenities for some of the artists and folks that are going to be performing at the Coliseum were inadequate compared to what you see in more modern venues. What they also noticed, and this is not to say that this is a knock on our community, but where the Coliseum is situated is not really in a commercial area. It's actually pretty unique for us in that it is, smack dab in the middle of a neighborhood. Across the way, we have the El Paso Zoo. We have some park space. But really, we have a neighborhood and residents nearby. It's a walkable area, which is a good thing. But we don't have is sort of a commercial district nearby with restaurants to basically hold people either before or after an event kicks off at the Coliseum space. And so they mentioned that as just a weakness for our area compared to where most Coliseum or event venues are in other communities, where they largely are in a downtown district or in a commercial district area, where you do have nearby access to restaurants and even hotels where people can actually stay. They did mention that another weakness was the deficit for operating the Coliseum. And the revenues brought in by the event spaces, at least back then when they were looking at this initially, approached about $2 million annually. I understand that our contract with the Sports Commission has changed a little bit, and so that figure is changed somewhat too, and we'll make sure that we are able to update that as soon as we can. Some of the opportunities for the Coliseum were to improve seating and ADA accessibility. One of the things they pointed out is the way you can actually gain more revenue at your event spaces if you actually make changes to the event space itself so that you actually have more VIP seating, box seating, those kinds of things. For now, it really is limited in what we can do in terms of seating. We have a lot of general admission seating and then standing room only ticketing. So not a whole lot of diversity in where people can sit and how much you basically can charge for each of those seats. So they did talk about how you can make some, reformat the space in a way that does allow you to have that VIP seating and to gain more revenue from your events. So that premier seating, those premier seating options are part of an opportunity that we can make if we make some improvements to the space. And then they talked about leveraging the outdoor space to create a more cohesive, walkable campus. They talked about how just outside all you really have right now is a parking lot, a pretty large parking lot. But they did propose some ideas for basically gaining more accessibility and functionality outside the venue space, basically building almost a row of commercial spaces where you do have some, quick retail shops, but also perhaps a couple of spaces for eateries. That way you can build, if you're not within a commercial corridor, you can certainly build on site, or at least think about building on site, that aspect of bringing more eateries to the area where people can actually spend some time before and after a concert enjoying themselves. So that on-site retail and restaurant space is an opportunity that they identified. One other opportunity they mentioned was we have an incredibly successful minor league hockey team. The Rhinos are actually in 2 different hockey divisions, I understand. They actually gained a grant for so much fan support and success, and were able to actually make improvements to the space in which they compete. But they certainly thought that there was an opportunity next door to that space to build a second ice sheet so that you actually can have a lot of community skating. If you go to any of the Rhino hockey games, you can see that those are packed houses. There's a lot of support. There's a lot of interest in ice hockey and ice skating, and so there perhaps could be an opportunity to add a second ice sheet in the space next door or somewhere nearby and allow that kind of industry or sports to grow here. They also mentioned the Sherman Barn, which is right next door to the County Coliseum. And for the most part, from what we saw, is mainly used to store items for the Coliseum and other spaces nearby. They thought that the Sherman Barn was perhaps an untapped space that if we were to make improvements, we could actually turn that into a small music venue for local musical acts. Not so much, the road shows that come through here. That's really for the County Coliseum. But really, the Sherman Barn, turning that into a more active space for community events and small concerts was a really interesting concept that they presented as well. They also just wanted to see if there's an opportunity to decrease the deficit and increase impact from making any other improvements. Some of the threats that they identified, we've been hearing about what the city is looking to do, next steps for the proposed multi-purpose center in downtown El Paso. We don't know where that's going to land. What they did note is that that center and its seating capacity is far above ours at the County Coliseum and would be. And so what they pointed out is that we actually have a particular niche for the kinds of events that we can bring in that still would be meaningful no matter what else would be built. If there's something with a larger capacity space, you're going to have certain acts go to those spaces and only those spaces. They're not really going to consider smaller spaces. And so we actually have a good connection to those mid-tier performance acts, or folks that are just still coming up and are not as incredibly popular still, which usually find their way to the Don Haskins Center for now. So we do have a niche that we actually can still really improve upon. There's also the threat of, they identified as a lack of funding. They mentioned that there have not been a lot of improvements to the County Coliseum campus in many years, and so continued lack of improvements could be a threat going forward. And then, to make sure that they also saw as a threat not having a shared vision throughout the community about what improvements or what the Coliseum could achieve, making sure that it does, and we do understand its place in the event marketplace here in El Paso, so that we are not in the way of acts coming to, we are not basically cannibalizing acts that would otherwise go to us if we're not in coordination with other places like Don Haskins Center and UTEP. So that's one of the threats they mentioned.
Regarding the lack of funding, we are working on evaluating what funding options are available and what the impact of those funding options are. We have some very limited proposals so far from our bond financial advisors. We're wanting to get more details and more information on that. But based on the proposals that Hunden gave to the county, you're looking at about a 1 cent tax on the debt for the Coliseum improvements, and about half a cent, and that's based on today's construction prices and today's interest rates. Those are, right now, we know that those are much more in flux than they have been. So a 1 cent approximate tax rate for the debt for the Coliseum, and a half a cent approximately for the amphitheater. But again, that's just the very first option we've heard from our financial advisor. Michael's been working with them along with our budget team. We're going to dive in and look at different options, and the timing of those will be critical, because when I say 1 cent, the county may be able to do it at a flat time, or we may be able to do a revenue-backed type of debt using hot funds. But what that would then impact is we would have to move Coliseum operations from hot funds over to the general fund. So just some options. We're exploring everything that's possible, and that's additional information we'll bring back to the court as you all continue to narrow down what you're specifically interested in.
Betsy, just a quick question, Mr. Judge, if I might. Since the Coliseum was first introduced in 1945 or so as a bomb shelter, could we not use the infrastructure monies coming our way for improvements and strengthening the shelter? And also, I just found out this morning that Sunland Park is in the process of building an amphitheater that's also going to be covered, and which is going to be a huge competitor for the size, the niche that we've been talking about. So they've realized that there's that special area that's lacking. And as you said, Michael, for artists that are coming up and artists that are coming down, they look for these smaller types of locations that they can perform. And also, as we move forward, that all these weddings and graduations that we lose to New Mexico, I can tell you, really are a big impact, a huge impact on our economy here in El Paso. I can tell you, there's a lot of weddings that take place right across the state line in St. Clair, for instance. I see it every time I go there, somebody's getting married there. So I apologize in not letting you continue with your presentation.
No, sir, I
That's
appreciate that. Yeah.
And those are great suggestions, Commissioner. We can definitely look to see if there's anything in the infrastructure bill that this would qualify for.
But you're right, there are going to be folks looking at this as an opportunity to make sure that they can actually build out venue space and take advantage of some of the things that we're lacking in our region. So, and we'll keep tabs on those folks and try to see how far along they are in terms of their timeline for producing that new event space. Make sure that we get that information updated to the court as well.
Michael, I had asked, or at least to entertain the idea of the synergism with the zoo, and you know, what kind of partnerships we could build. And you see in some of the cities, you've got the zoo and other venues, and sort of they combine them. And was there any sort of a little bit of research as to what kind of partnerships would be available between us and the zoo, from parking to other opportunities?
They did look at the zoo as a possible place for expanded parking when it comes to certain events. So I do know that they did look at the zoo as a potential place for that, you know, that kind of synergism. I don't know what kind of, you know, agreement we would need to have. I guess, you know, this is still sort of a high-level concept of what kinds of improvements we can see, perhaps, or support. But they did take into account the zoo space, as well as the park space across the way and the neighborhood nearby, just to make sure that the impact on events could be measured, right? You want to know that you have an adequate amount of parking, and that you're not going to impact the neighborhood around you as well.
I think both the city and the county can benefit from understanding that synergism a little bit better. I think it creates, you know, an opportunity to do certain things, not just the parking. I mean, you could go from a bridge, because I know the traffic is always that problem, and I would not want to create more any, traffic problems there because it's really difficult to cross in that area. I think also one of the reasons we have difficulty is also that, to request more from the city, from the, signal lights to a little bit more, it's sort of been disregarded as just a pass-through, through Paisano, but not in conjunction to what do we need, just like residents, right? They need, better access to their property, or they need better sidewalks, and I think the same thing. And, I know I'll bring it up when Betsy and I meet with the mayor, periodically to see, what is it that they can do to enhance that, because it'll help the zoo and it'll help us. So I think that's one. The other one is I'm glad that you're looking at the weaknesses, but you're looking, the opportunities are saying, how to address those weaknesses. For example, I think the developing more of a commercial in restaurants and all that, because, like you said, you want to go, I know I've gone to the Coliseum, and then I'll go eat downtown, and it's really hard to get back in, and so you try to get there earlier, but there's nothing that you could have there, any restaurants or anything that would help for people to sort of hang out a little bit before they go into some of the events. And so I know you addressed that on that. I think another thread is to really come down and find out once and for all on the expansion of the bridge as to what kind of an impact it's going to have on the Coliseum, because a lot of our plans might go south because of, if they're going to do something, even if it's a little further, but is it going to create more congestion? What's going to happen with that plan? 'Cause it's a pretty big, broad development of that bridge. So I think we need to really figure out, or I don't know who can tell us, but I don't think it's fair that we're not able to understand the plans to such a point to know what kind of impact it'll have on the Coliseum.
Yes, sir. We are monitoring as best as we can what that $500 million project to improve the Bridge of the Americas would look like, and how it could impact the region, including the County Coliseum campus. We want to make sure that whatever steps the court takes, whether it wants to, looks to improve the venue, we want to make sure that those are meaningful improvements and are not going to be impacted by any other large project like that. So we'll keep in touch with our folks at the federal level to make sure that we can assess what that program of work would look like, and how it expands perhaps across US 54, if at all.
Okay, thank you.
Judge,
Commissioner Stubb?
I just wanted to comment real quick. I mean, one thing that I feel like we should also look at is, connecting this and supporting the existing local businesses, because there actually are many restaurants that are close by, like the Good Luck Cafe, Lucky Cafe, Hamburger Hut, Chico's Tacos. We can't forget Chico's Tacos. The old Sheepdog Brewery is close, but they're somewhat disconnected, and so. Let's not forget that we have those local businesses that are staples in El Paso that have been here a long time. Some are newer, like the Sheepdog Brewery, but there's lots to build upon, and so I just wanted to bring that up.
Yes, sir.
I agree.
We certainly have a lot of value for the small businesses around in the area, and we certainly want to see if and when we make any improvements, that we include in that at least some kind of marketing scheme that points to the local businesses nearby, and how they can be a part of any kind of event. As somebody comes into the area, they can plan out where those spaces are near the Coliseum. So there could be some marketing aspects or ways to help market those places in a way that's meaningful to those events. So we'll take a look at some of the SWOT analysis.
Just a second, Michael. Omar, go ahead and just come up, please.
Hi, Omar Ropele from El Paso Sports Commission. Since you were talking about this, we have a really good relationship with the zoo, and we were talking about building a bridge to connect the zoo and the Coliseum. Unfortunately, that is a state road, so that needed to go through TxDOT, and that's where it fell through the crack. Just so you know, we were also trying to do that as well. Just adding to what you were saying to the conversation.
Was that conclusive that they wouldn't?
It didn't follow through.
Oh, okay.
But because it was a state road.
That's
Okay.
definitely something we can continue to work on.
Yeah,
But we can retake that as well, and that'll make improvement as well.
yeah, I think that'd be, just for, even from the safety perspective, somebody trying to cross over would be pretty dangerous, so. Thank you for following up. Yes, Tony?
But I will say though too, and just in helping these guys before I actually started, Tony Rodriguez with the Sports Commission, is that we do use the zoo parking and they do use us. For example, when we do have like big concerts like Grupo Firme, where you have like 5,000 people coming in the Coliseum, and you also have a Rhinos hockey game at the same time, we do have that relationship. And so like once the concert's finished, myself, even with Omar and Bo and some of our mains, we'll go out there and pick up the trash that maybe people have left there at the zoo, as well as when the zoo has big events like Boo at the zoo and stuff like that, they can use our parking on that. So we do have that kind of relationship on that, just so you all know.
Yeah. I was thinking more beyond parking, a little bit, a trolley that goes across or something. But thank you.
Judge, Commissioners, I know we brought it up once, that a tunnel would be extraordinarily expensive. Maybe, because I think I saw someplace where they had something like that, with the tunnel had actually an aquarium that people could go in and visit and at times use it to get across to the Coliseum area. But, I'm talking about a lot of money and just a lot of ideas that other places have used.
That would be a cool addition to the zoo, to have a tunnel walkway, aquarium tunnel walkway.
I think Albuquerque, don't they have some really close
They-
connection to?
So they have the aquarium, the biosphere park, or the park, and the zoo all together.
Yeah, all in that area with a trolley, I guess it goes to the three of them. So.
And I do recall that when the city had a lot of turnout for its Music Under the Stars program at the Chamizal, that they actually had some parking at the zoo, and they would actually have shuttles pick up people and deliver them to and from the Chamizals. And so perhaps there could be something that we could work out with the city where we could actually have shuttles running between the two properties and make sure that we have people getting across safely.
And the small businesses, as Commissioner Stout said, maybe on the events that they could
be
do
a circuit that
little
we could
shuttle.
create that actually builds or connects people to those areas too. Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you. So looking at the SWOT analysis for the amphitheater, they identified several strengths, including a gap in the local and regional market for an amphitheater of that size. And what they're talking about is about 5,000 seats as a capacity, give or take. They also talked about the strength is having a shared vision with El Paso Parks and Recreation as sort of a master plan to build this out, to make sure that we can work with our recreation staff and make sure that this is a definable and an improved part of the overall improvements to Escada de Park, as well as accessibility to downtown El Paso. The amphitheater is pretty nearby so much. It's still in the center of the city, but it's also near downtown El Paso. And, they did identify, they detected a lot of support from the community, a lot of interest in an amphitheater to come into Escada Park, or an amphitheater of any kind in the area. So there's a lot of willingness to see something like this materialize in the area. Some of the weaknesses they identified was that the market may be able to support a larger purpose-built amphitheater. So, if somebody were to swoop in and build something larger, that could be a weakness. And then we still do have a distance from major markets. Basically, what you're trying to do is pull in acts to play here, and sometimes they will just cross over El Paso. In some cases, they will say, we're going to head to Phoenix from Dallas, and we're not going to really see El Paso as a stop over place. So the Sports Commission folks can talk a little bit more about how they try to pull in and attract people and kind of figure out when people are planning their tours, how they can actually make El Paso a part of that journey. Some of the opportunities they pointed out was that you could incorporate shaded and windbreaking elements to maximize events per day per year. So basically, we have great weather, but we do have certain conditions, like in the spring where you do have some windy days. But because our warm months extend well beyond the summer, there's a lot of opportunity to take advantage of in terms of great weather days here. an outdoor venue space really relies on having clear, warm temperatures for audiences to really come out to. Then you can actually, another opportunity is to create synergy with the existing and future events at Escada the Park to create a more holistic guest experience. And so you can plan different events on the same day at Escada the Park and actually have families come and make a day of spending time at the park with perhaps the highlight of the day being a performance at the amphitheater. So there's a way to really build into the programming with the park, and the parks folks do a good job of attracting people to Escalante right now. They're dynamic in their marketing approach, and so there's a way to really incorporate some of the things that the Parks Department is already doing, and making sure that you actually top this off with some highlighted events at the amphitheater space. They also talked about, an opportunity to drive visitation with on-site food and retail. So the more of those kinds of food providers that we can bring to the park separately, the more you actually can have people wanted to show up early for a concert at the amphitheater at Escada the Park. That's just naturally given. You want to have as many amenities as possible, and sometimes this can mean food trucks. If you plan with the food industry community that you're going to have an event on certain days, and you actually can provide them space at a discounted rate, there's a way to have that synergy with the private industry folks and make sure that you have an assortment of eating options on those events. Some of the threats that they talked about, of course, are some of the weather limitations. It does get cold in the couple months in the winter. Although if you look at some of the Sun Bowl games, we do have some really decent weather, oftentimes even in December and January. So I don't think that's too hard of a threat. And then, the other threat is, there are some competing venues right now to some degree. At a much larger scale, you do have Southwest University Park, which has a little bit more seating right now. But as they point out, that concert space is not really posed in a way to really maximize a concert. It's really for ball games and such, and so you don't have the best acoustics, and you don't have the best, you don't have as an adequate experience as you would at an amphitheater, at a ballpark. The other competing venue is McAllican Canyon, which is, I think, maxed out at a seating capacity of 1,500 people. So you don't have a lot of large things you could bring to McAllican Canyon. They were incredibly impressed. It's an impressive space, right, built into the mountains and beautiful, but you certainly have some limited capacity for seating there.
Michael, if you look at our potential, I mean, even if you look at Sunland or any of these, or Southwest or McAllican, our potential because of the landmass and the other activities that can surround, I think it outdoes any opportunity. Because, I mean, you can mix in from playing golf in the morning and staying there from the lake to all of these other things that can draw people during the whole day, and then have the amphitheater. And I was going to present people that have approached me that want to, from the private industry, that want to do certain things, and I'll talk about that. But on this particular subject, I really would like to, have someone follow up on Mr. Rodriguez, who proposed that, I don't know what we're going to be calling it, the
Statue?
The yellow one that I brought here
The
for
art.
The LAR.
but there's a name, and I apologize that I can't remember what he was calling it. But what I was saying is that we can't disregard and just ignore the fact that they were willing to bring private money, and also it included an amphitheater and a plaza. And if we could do something like that where private money would offset the cost of the amphitheater and the plaza and everything that they're proposing, I just don't want to disregard it. And then, I mean, I know he's been wanting to get some response from us. So I don't know, Betsy, if we could assign someone at least to vet it out and see what the reality of it. They've been in my office several times, but like I said, the amphitheater is part of what they're proposing, as well as the plaza around the structure. And so I think it's worth at least looking at, and I don't want anybody else to say that, they try to, sort of bring private money into this situation and that we didn't look at it. So I would like, I'm at the point now that I really don't know what to do other than entertain their enthusiasm for it. But maybe we could vet it a little more than that, and then come back to us and tell us if it makes sense. I know there's some challenges. The structure is really big, the concrete, and, you know, how do you place it and all that. And I think Veronica, with the architect, has looked at some of the challenges of doing something of that nature. But I would really like to get to a conclusive point.
We certainly are interested in understanding how an amphitheater can actually improve or augment those kinds of additions that are great for our community. So any way we can kind of find some place for partnership with those folks is something that we're open to. We're also open to possible sponsorships going forward for some of these spaces too. You know, we certainly want to be as open-minded as we can about how this all can work financially for us.
Judge,
Yeah, yes, sir. Commissioner?
I don't mind vetting it, but as part of that vetting, I just want to make sure that we take into account, you know, if it's a big structure, I think some of the views of the mountains off of the lake, and I don't want to obstruct those views, right?
Absolutely.
And so just being cognizant of that, and I also just wanted to mention that I think that this also would fit in with our programming to expand our heritage tourism, especially in South Central El Paso, and the modern history of that area, the early urban history of the rich and the rich history in our neighborhoods, as well as our historic assets like Ascarate and the Coliseum. So, you know, this is exciting for that prospect as well.
Yes, sir. And the consultants did point out that where they were situating the amphitheater so far, and they were just a proposal, was in a way so that people can actually get a great view of the mountains. They thought that landscape was something that you really should
Take
try
advantage of.
to bring into the space and make a key part of people having an experience at a concert venue outside in El Paso. So something that's unique to us. They wanted to make sure that we highlight the great Franklin Mountains that we have in our community.
Sort of McCallican Canyon, the way they did it, how it gets all the features of the mountains, and, you know, they've really made it blend in very well. So
Yes, sir.
I think we need to do the same.
Yeah. So getting back to the Coliseum, they pointed out some of the things that we knew to some degree, that the Coliseum, while has a really key part of our community, is rich in history, has a lot of outdated and outmoded elements that certainly could be served by some improvements. So they did mention that if we continue to not improve the site, that it would fall into obsolescence and cost more to improve or salvage at a later date. And so, you know, time is of the essence if we were to take any action pretty soon. The variety of buildings to maintain and book events for and manage lead to annual losses of about $1.8 billion. We'll have to see if perhaps the change in our contract with the Sports Commission has made any kind of change, but that's the data that they collected back last year at the end of the summer. And so revenues are approximately $700,000 per year, while our expenses are about $2.5 million, and that is sort of a model that that we are working with right now. Expenses might not be easily reduced, even with improvements. Revenues can impact can be increased with more events and higher spending on site. And that's the name of the game, which is like, what kinds of improvements can you make to the space so that actually gain more events and in some cases, higher revenues from those events itself. So not just frequency of events, but also the kinds of events that you're able to pull into the space. They mentioned that given the lack of a civic area and the market beyond the Coliseum, there is leakage in the market for major shows and events that are not able to be held locally. And so we are sometimes losing out to other markets like Albuquerque or Phoenix, and to the east of us, some of the more major cities in Texas. So El Paso County is losing economic spending to other markets in Mexico as well. The event center has done well to attract consistent attendance to its events.
Just a second, Michael, because we're losing, but it's not like we're proposing a bigger venue, so at least we're capturing the smaller ones that nobody would capture. So I think you need to look at the other side of it. All of these smaller events that come through here, if we didn't have the Coliseum, where would they go?
Yeah.
They'd go to other venues in New Mexico and some of the other areas, maybe Sunland now because they have the amphitheater. So if we were building, I mean, if we're proposing we're going to get it a lot bigger, whatever, we're losing it, but I don't think we're talking about even trying to capture that market. But I just want to see the flip side of the coin that says, where would these venues go if we didn't have the Coliseum?
Yeah.
And a lot of them depend from boxing and, you know, the smaller venues and the wrestling and, you know, all the, you know, artists that come through here that have those smaller venues. So I just want to make sure that we are capturing
Yeah.
some of the market that wouldn't be captured if we didn't have the Coliseum.
One of the points that the consultant made, though, is that some of the amenities are lacking right now, especially for artists, and so that space behind the scenes could be improved upon, and actually could be a way to draw those kinds of performance acts. So, you know, building up or making sure that those improvements include amenities for those performers is sometimes impactful as well.
Yeah. Omar, can I ask you a question, please? Omar, do you know of any situation, because we keep saying that, but have you ever had a situation that you lost an opportunity because of the facility or because they didn't like the amenities, or is that something that happens often, that you lost an opportunity, or do you sort of figure out how to accommodate it?
We figure it out, sir. The situation that why we might lose, and I was just talking to Commissioner Leon before the meeting, is, for example, Pitbull. We had Pitbull in 2020, just before COVID, and now he's going to the Don Haskins for the reason that he is estimating that he's going to have a bigger show, a bigger audience, so he needs more seats. That's the only reason, but not even big shows like Pepe Aguilar. He needs 13 dressing rooms. We actually only have 4, but we managed to have it done.
I think that's important because I think we're not asking, I mean, we know what our potential is and the type. So he comes here, you know, he likes the crowd, and now he's going to get a bigger crowd. I don't see anything negative about that. I see that it's a positive, that if maybe he hadn't come to begin with, he wouldn't end up going to the Don Haskins because he wouldn't have known the, you know, the attraction that he had.
Yes, it's based on the estimating of how much attendance are they expecting and the potential of the gross revenue that they might have from ticket sales.
Okay.
One thing that if I may,
Absolutely.
the Hunden didn't explain there to the community that 2.5, which is now 2.1 million, it's not coming from the general fund or from the taxpayers' money. That's from a separate tax, the hotel occupancy tax, and the return on investment it's now that those 700,000, which just a correction, you said 70,000.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's 700,000 average. That is for the county now available for whatever you guys want. So and it's much greater, the return on investment, that other counterparts like the city of what they're receiving from the company they have.
Oh, okay.
Just so you know.
So expenses have now gone down to 2.1 million?
Because of the contract, yes.
Okay.
It's 200,000 times 12, 2.4, 2.1, 2.2.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And so making improvements to the County Coliseum can allow you to have that kind of higher pricing for certain seats, and so that actually adds to the revenue you could draw for each event, right? And that benefits not just the county, but also the performer and the people that are also promoting the act too. So, you know, if you're able to raise revenues through each event, from some of these improvements, then it helps everybody, including the county.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Omar.
I also forgot to mention all of the community events where we don't actually charge rent, but they're invaluable. And maybe, I don't know if there's a way of us tracking all of the times that we have just offered the Coliseum, how much would be considered, I don't know if it could be considered as a donation to the community, or how much it would be giving back to the community worth of all the expenses that we're just providing. That will be also something interesting, although everything that you're giving back to the community through community events.
Well, I think the vaccine was a perfect example of where would we have held it, could we have done it anywhere else? And so I think that has a value that needs to be established, right, to offset, all these things that it's costing us, but there's also a return on the money from community involvement.
Yes, everything that the community is getting from them, and they're just taking it for granted because we're not saying it. Even just from electricity, amenities, and services, utilities.
Okay, I think
I
that's
definitely think we should have a tracking mechanism for that. I thought we had put it in the contract, Omar, but I'm probably wrong. But just for that exact purpose, to be able to show
Absolutely.
those additional values.
Yeah, because now you get the full understanding, and it's just not like an expense, but, there's also an offset from that Coliseum that you're able to do the two functions.
Yeah, nothing
The
is
community as well as a venue kind of.
Really, and add to the, or diminish the deficit a little bit.
Yeah. I think that's a fair, I would like that. I think it would be a fair way to express to the community, because they see the loss and that's sort of blind to that situation.
Yeah.
And even if they're not paying for it, they're still getting it from the county. So that's something that we can look into.
Okay, thank you, Omar.
Also point out that improvements to the County Coliseum campus in general could also improve our capability for offering community event space to folks, and basically having more events, not just at the Coliseum space, but other spaces that we help activate. So, and which gets me to the next point the group found, which was the event center has done well to attract consistent attendance to its events. We're talking notably about the space in which the Rhinos perform or compete. Despite its lack of flexible event space, hockey games of various leagues and public skating are extremely popular amongst El Pasoans. As mentioned to you, those are packed houses every time they compete, and they've been successful in their leagues. The Sherman Barn is being underutilized in its current fashion. That's that space that they said could be turned into a smaller music venue for more local acts that you could perhaps, have different folks come in and use at a more discounted rate. The Coliseum campus is lacking walkability and could better leverage their available space in the parking lot. And so that's that idea of sort of like a row for retail and restaurant spaces that you could actually build into the Coliseum space or campus. What they noticed is that when people do come to events, or what they've heard from folks is when they come to events, they park, they go in, they come out immediately and usually leave. And so there's a way to actually build a way for people to kind of spend more time here at the Coliseum. The neighborhood immediately surrounding the campus does not provide the visitor with amenities, and that's not a knock. That's just a fact that we are in the middle of a neighborhood, and so you don't have a lot of the commercial district to point people to for any kind of help for eating and dining. There's also an opportunity to fill a gap in the local market for an outdoor amphitheater larger than McAlligan Canyon and smaller than Southwest University Park is just like some of their major findings.
I did want to mention the GSA is having an event this fall on that bridge project where they're supposed to engage stakeholders and give some information about the implications of the project. I don't know if that'll be final information and final details on the impact to neighboring properties, but they are arranging a stakeholder engagement for this fall.
I think we need to be very active in that.
Alexis, can you please move on to the next slide? Clickers, there we go. Implications for amphitheater. Nearly every major market in the U.S. has a large outdoor amphitheater with capacity up to 20,000 seats that hosts summer concert series. El Paso is the exception here. The El Paso market currently has 2 facilities that serve as outdoor venues that can work for certain events, as I mentioned to you, Southwest University Park. Thanks. A little bit larger. and McAllen Canyon is limited in capacity at 1,500 seats. Given how large the total market is and the lack of existing options, there is a market opportunity for a purpose-built amphitheater. What they're proposing is 5,000 seats for that outdoor space at Escada de Park. And so their recommendations included several things, including performing cosmetic and functional renovations to the Coliseum, improving some of the creature comforts, functionality for the users, and new event areas that could attract and retain events and customers, both willing to spend more. The improvements would be important for back of the house and for public areas of seating, as well as some of the technical elements and building systems. A lot of that information they gained from the Sports Commission. We do have a whole lot to offer artists when they do come here, but if we were to make some improvements, we could actually get them a lot more done and bring more acts here too. They mentioned, as a part of a recommendation, developing a second ice sheet adjacent to the event center. They mentioned that skating and ice skating is very popular. The minor league hockey team brings in a lot of folks, and so there's a good opportunity to build that second ice sheet to hit that strong market demand for those kinds of events. They've also talked about repurposing the Sharman Barn into a boutique music venue so this gains you about 1,500 to 2,000 seats. This is a small, more intimate setting for musical acts, and that can actually benefit the campus with more manageable space. You can, market to the Coliseum on those kinds of events and basically have more programming in the area. They also mentioned developing on-site retail and/or restaurants to create a more dynamic experience that will lengthen guests' stay at the Coliseum and in external buildings. They mentioned, of course, that people just come and go when they do come to events, so they don't really make being at the Coliseum a big part of the day other than the event itself. They also talked about paving a midway through the Coliseum campus to improve walkability on this kind of cluster of external buildings and enhance the cohesiveness of the property. Right now, it's not walkable; it's just parking lot and then Coliseum. They mentioned developing a mid-sized theater, about 5,000 capacity at Escada de Park, and that there's an opportunity to fill a gap in the local market for outdoor event space larger than McAllen Canyon and smaller than Southwest University Park. They also mentioned incorporating shade and windbreaking structures to maximize viable event days within the calendar year. You want to make sure that you can extend our good weather as long as you can.
Omar, if you don't mind. Oh, you can, okay. Yeah, I was just trying to think of, any business that you have, it needs to have from morning to night. I mean, especially in El Paso, you can't have something weekends, you can't have something, and I know that's one of the focuses that when I talked to Judge Wolf, when he saw the Scarate, saw the Coliseum and so forth, is that it can't be, like when you have an event and then you have something, but it has to be sort of created, people going in, people going out, during the day, somehow you can figure something like that. But one of the things I was thinking is, sort of when I looked at the Border Patrol Museum, that we have such an opportunity to create a museum atmosphere. You've got all the people that perform there already, but not a lot of people get to see that. I mean, if you go into the offices in that area, it's just amazing. It's just an amazing place to look at, from Elvis Presley to all those pictures that you have. But I think if we created a sort of a museum type situation during the day, and also we have, people don't realize, but a lot of the local bands from here from El Paso that traveled all over the world, and so one of the ideas that was brought up to me is to have that kind of, how do we honor the local bands, and what a better place than the Coliseum to create that paraphernalia and all the things that we could gather from the community from the Night Dreamers and all these others that played that are very popular, but combine that with the people that have performed there. I'm just sort of throwing out there that you need to create an atmosphere that it's, from morning to afternoon kind of thing, that people come in and, you can charge to go in like a museum or, so anyway, just some thoughts that people have brought up to me about the local bands that nobody has really, and I talked to Brian a little bit about that no one has ever honored the local bands, and they're pretty impressive. I mean, from going all over Europe and traveling, and people that went to other bands and, made records and so forth. Not only here, but in Las Cruces. For some reason, there's quite a few artists there that did those tours. But anyway, I mean, just sort of entertain that idea to take advantage, because I think to me, the most important thing is that we're gonna have to be creative and continue to, have this our cake and be okay with it. That it doesn't have to be that progressive. I mean, you can remodel it, you can do all the things that you need to do, but if you kept that sort of arcade kind of atmosphere that, that it's part of the past, that it's historical, that it's, keep that, and then we don't have that much pressure that it's got to be, this very progressive and incredibly remodeled kind of environment, but take advantage of the structure and the history that comes with a Coliseum. And I think one of them would be to create a museum. Like I said, most people have not had the opportunity to see those pictures of all the artists that have gone through there. Are just extremely amazing. So anyway, whatever, maybe you could propose something that we create. When I went to I apologize to everybody because I had never been to the museum at the border, there on Trans Mountain Road. That's amazing, and we don't get a lot of people going there for some reason, but I think we need to create a culture of this history and who we are and how we do things, and I think the Coliseum would lend itself to really create that historic venue of the great artists that have been, that not only have come through here, but that actually live here in El Paso. So,
something that comes to my mind is like, and I don't know if this is what you're talking about, Judge, but like the El Paso Athletic Hall of Fame, that it has it on the hallways of the Don Haskins Center, maybe like a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame over at the Coliseum or something like that. I don't know.
and have the local artists that would be there and featured, and so because I think our best bet is that we hold on to the historical component of it. We know people love the fact that they've been there. I mean, I tell people my dad worked 45 years at the Popular, and every Christmas party was there at the Coliseum. That's where they held their Christmas party, and they had, 800 so employees at one time. And so everybody's got a story, and I think we need to capture that as a place that's extremely historical, extremely arcade, and be okay with it. And yes, it looks like old, but take advantage of that because, that's what it is, and that's the history since 1945 or whatever, when we started that. So anyway.
1942.
Pardon me?
1942.
1942?
80 years ago, yes, sir.
Wow. I mean, it's just amazing. When people talk about, maybe we should demolish it, I'll tell you we'll have our hands full. I can tell you right now that the community would be up in arms if we looked at it from that, or that we decide that the history component of isn't good enough, or that it's too old, or that it's too, I mean, you don't go say the missions are too old, right? Like, you don't go, oh, these missions are too old, we gotta, redo them. So I think there's something to the theme of keeping that, obviously with all the improvements and the green spots and a little bit more curb, curb attraction kind of thing. I think that's important, but I think we could play on really good on the idea that it's a historical place that can continue to look historical, even from the remodeling, that we continue to make it look historical and not go into more progressive. And I'm not speaking just for myself, it's just a lot of discussions that I've had Of course, Jefferson, the alumni, they think it's the extension, it's their their gym or something for the alumni of Jefferson High School, because all the Mardi Gras are held there. And they've been very creative, for example, having their dance with Little Joe and then opening the top as a place that they got to hear Little Joe from the public, and then had their school event there at the bottom. I think the curtains, the way you guys are doing that, so I think that, I don't know, I'm more excited that we capture what we have and embrace it, instead of looking at it from, how do we get it more progressive and more, I think we're going in the wrong direction. I think that historical tie is going to be very important.
And Judge, if I can add to it, number one, Omar, don't be correcting the judge anymore. Come on, 1942.
It's to say 1945.
Yeah, just go with it. Come on. Omar, also notable politicians that have gone through there. Not only artists, but a tremendous history out of the Coliseum.
3 presidential visits.
Some were better than others. Never mind.
Even the building behind the Sherman Barn, that is the original Coliseum. That is the daddy of the Coliseum. And everybody who sees it says this is a historical building. And if we revive it and make it happen, I'm pretty sure I am very confident that I will even rent it more than the Coliseum itself, because of the capabilities they are.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that they do give us, our strategic partners, that they give us an opportunity to say, how do we capture this and make it marketable by capturing, that it's from 1942, all these things that we're talking about, the presidential, how do we capture that as part of the attraction? That somebody might want to, go to another building and have nothing to it, or you take advantage that, because people don't realize that when I've taken people there, I'm the one that has to tell them about, I don't know if you knew Elvis Presley was here, I didn't know if you knew this, Frank Sinatra, and I have to do that story. And I think the actual building should sell itself. As soon as you go in, that it tells you, what's happened here. And I think that, like I said, I think they should give us a little bit of an analysis of capturing what we have and taking advantage of that, instead of moving away from that kind of, like I said, more progressive, remodeling it and not taking into consideration that we continue to make it look like 1942.
And Judge, you have a really good point. And if you go to the event space at LA Live in Los Angeles, which is the marquee place for concerts these days, it's formerly LA Live. I forget what it's called. It's been named after a cryptocurrency company, unfortunately. But if you go there, you'll see huge photographs of some of the biggest acts that have come through the area. So you'll see Taylor Live's concert. She was there for several days in a week. That sold out each night and had a bunch of different guests. But you're right, we could certainly showcase our history. We can actually have those large photographs of Frank Sinatra and Elvis performing at the Coliseum, the different folks that have come through there. We can showcase that as much as we can. But certainly we want to think about possible improvements to the area that actually add to the functionality of the space.
Absolutely.
As well as the venue experience there too. Somebody going there can say, hey, that was a really comfortable and enjoyable listening experience for me, by some of the improvements that are spelled out here in the consultants' slate of improvements that they've pointed out to us.
And Michael, when we're talking about improvements, did we look at the fact that, like Santa Fe, for example, they're not going to make an improvement that doesn't enhance their history? When we look at improvements, are we looking at how do you do it to continue to make look like the 50s or the 40s kind of thing, and go with a theme instead of all of a sudden putting a real fancy, a place there that it doesn't coincide. Even if you look at the concession stands, I mean, they're a little bit more modern, right, than it was, and I don't understand why we don't keep the same soda fountain kind of approach.
Sure.
The Judge, the Hunden study didn't include design. Well, they gave us like the layout, But those actual design improvements would be part of an RFP. And that is really, really valuable feedback from the court. What feel do you want for improvements? Do you want it to have a retro feel? Or do you want it to have a more modern feel or elegant or, because there's a lot of different designs that we could show, like of other places that have done upgrades. And it's really important that, like, if we want that historic El Paso feel or a theme to it, that's really important for us to incorporate into any RFP.
Yeah. And I knew there
for
was
the
in
actual improvements.
I knew it was in the design, but at least that we begin to talk about, what is it that we want to create that theme that, I mean, to me it would be, you're not going to, it's always uniqueness, right? How do you differentiate yourself? Marketing is all about differentiation. So how do you differentiate yourself? We have an opportunity to differentiate ourselves more than any community because, it was a bomb shelter, my goodness, just from the fact that you could really work on that theme by itself. And then the fact that it's in the 40s, and do we keep that theme going? Just so that we're consistent. As I said, the concessions are a little more modern than the building and that kind of thing. And maybe we would have thought, how do you improve, like you said, Michael, to make it more, manageable and more accommodating? But the theme, I think, is going to be the key, that we don't lose that opportunity.
And we're glad to hear that feedback. I think our next steps are to take more of the feedback from you and perhaps develop from what you all see here, some of the improvements that have been proposed here as a slate that increases functionality, improves the listening experience by adding better AV and sound systems to the space. Those kinds of things we can think about as a high concept level, but when we certainly want to propose an RFP, we want to make sure that we can fold into that the design aspect of that you're pointing to. That really touches upon our history and makes that a strength for us.
And you all could take those, you could take a few versions of it, and again, as part of your community engagement in it, people are much more likely to support something, as you all know, if we offered them a few different types of retro designs or, to look at and to vote on and give feedback on before we bring an actual proposal to fund. It goes over so much better with that community engagement piece.
And then I'm thinking always commercial and private ownerships, and when I was thinking about the artists themselves, each one of those artists has foundations. And if we reached out to that foundation and said, hey, we're honoring Frank Sinatra, what can you do to honor the families, for example? I know if I had a famous uncle and somebody said that we could do that, that we could, add to it and continue to celebrate, that person through the foundations. So I'm thinking, all these marketing opportunities that we have, but reach out to all these artists and see their foundations that exist throughout the country. I know that people are always looking, I don't want to brag, but the first Ben-Hur was my uncle. And in the silent movie, it was my uncle, Ramon Navarro. He changed his name, I don't know why, but instead of Samaniego. But they're always looking for honoring him, his family in California, honoring his family. And how do you do that? I mean, had he been at the Coliseum, I'd be the first trying to figure out how to get him on there. So I think those, just grab that history that we have and make it extremely valuable.
Sure. And our consultant did identify that pretty quickly, that nostalgia really resonates for a lot of the folks that think about the Coliseum. What they'd like to see is improvements. They want to make sure that it still honors the history of the space itself.
And Michael, Judge, consult with, there's I think it's called the Sonic Ranch recording. That's the biggest residential recording studio in the world. Right there in our backyard, it's off of Alameda, way down there. And we have all sorts of world artists coming in and out of El Paso that we have no idea they're here. And the reason I bring that up is perhaps ask them how we could improve those acoustics. there at the Coliseum that maybe will draw some of these people in a little bit more.
Yep.
Great
Judge,
idea. Commissioner Stubb?
really digging the conversation about, taking the historic aspect and historic preservation. I think it falls in line with a lot of what we've been working on historic preservation wise. And just wanted to mention that my staff has been having conversations with the Sports Commission about a mural that represents the community and the history of the Coliseum as part of its 80th birthday celebration. And our celebration that we're working on to celebrate heritage in South Central. So I think I'm really excited about what we're talking about here and the prospect of the historic preservation and cultural heritage aspect with this investment.
Getting to that 100 years, so it's becoming more historical.
So as you can see, they spelled out some of those more concrete improvements that we can consider making to improve the functionality and the experience at the space. They also mentioned those other campus improvements, the second sheet of ice, upgrading the judging area, upgrading the West Pavilions, and that music venue that could actually be that place for smaller acts to perform in. And then the general site improvements could be a more defined parking space and landscape space, new sidewalks, new midway, general site landscaping, better lighting, and sort of a festival plaza and perhaps even a space for food trucks to offer some goods. And here's that concept that they're talking about. So if you can see it in your map, the light orange spaces are those spaces that we already have there built. Those red shaded areas are some of those additional commercial spaces that perhaps can be added that would allow for more dining and retail options for folks. And if you can see between those two spaces and the Coliseum and the Sherman Bar would be sort of a walkway that would be landscaped. This is, of course, high concept. If we were to continue on with this and develop an RFP, we would want to make sure that design would include better details or increased details, a more conceptualized look at what you all are seeking for improvements to the space. But this really does reformat at least the parking space in a way that lends it to be more walkable and allows people to want to show up a little bit earlier and stay a little bit later after events. Yes, ma'am.
I was just trying to figure out where everything is located. I can't for the life of me see 10, the food truck plaza. Where is that? I don't seem to see it. I see 11.
Right next to number 2, ma'am.
Right next to, I see it.
In the back
Okay,
end.
perfect.
And
Okay.
so that would be sort of the back end of the Sherman Barn, which
Okay.
would be that added, small musical space. So
That would
that
be
way
great.
people could pretty conveniently go outside
Yeah,
and grab
that would be
something
great.
quick.
That would be great.
Did they mention how many parking spaces we might lose by having this format?
I don't believe, they might have some of those details. We'll have to look into the larger study for that. But
They did talk about the parking during the original presentation and about how it would impact the parking versus the normal current parking demands.
yeah. But as you mentioned, Judge, we could make sure that there's that synergism between us and the El Paso Zoo to make sure that, if we were to increase these kinds of commercial spaces and take away from the parking space, that there's a way to solve for a large turnout for events that, uses the city of El Paso's parking lots as well.
Did they mention a possibility of maybe a parking garage or adding a second level?
I don't think that they thought that was a concept to pursue because it just could be really costly. And so they wanted to really focus in on the existing spaces and adding just some spaces that allow for revenue generation pretty quickly.
If you may, one of the main, we also have a festival type of events on the parking lot because of the way it is. If with this type of parking lot, we might lose the ability of doing that. just putting it out there.
So altogether, you can see that all those, that full slate of improvements altogether comes to about a little bit more than $54 million in expenses for us. They do spell out each of those things, but some of them are pretty long-standing needs. One of those is the marquee sign that I did not mention earlier. We don't have something that adequately helps attract folks to the area. Any questions on some of the expenses that they identified here?
No.
They did also point out that if we were to make any improvements to the Coliseum campus, that you could actually gain more folks coming to those events. They did sort of a projection going out 30 years about what improvements could mean in terms of the kinds of folks that were actually be coming into the space then. And so you can kind of see that, you know, it currently attracts about 115 to 150,000 attendees per year. They projected that it could attract more than 180,000 attendees per year once it stabilizes, including more than 30,000 attendees to events at the new Sherman Barn event facility. And so having that additional musical space could gain you a lot more people coming into the campus.
That's a good return on investment. I mean, you're looking at 54 million, but the impact,
Yeah.
is it anywhere here that shows the financial impact?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Right here is your pro forma that shows you what those additional revenues would look like, as well as some of the expenses for you know, more operational capacity going forward. So as Mr. Rapello I mentioned, we can make updates that shows the revenue is a little bit different now with the current agreement with the Sports Commission, and make sure that we get that updated information to the court as well. And so here's a summary of a 30-year impact on what's expected to generate from some of the improvements if we were to seek those out. Of course, there would be job generation just from the construction or the improvements made on the Coliseum campus. That goes for any kind of project that we support anyways. You know, you do see some job generation from those projects, but that's a little bit more short-term, and then, of course, you do have some expanded capacity for revenue generation. Are we okay to move on to the amphitheater?
Yeah.
So as I mentioned to you, they've looked at Escada at the Park and where perhaps an amphitheater could go. They talked to our Parks and Rec folks about the master plan, and you know, they really, this is just a high-level concept. This is not, of course, a permanent site for anything, but they thought if you were to propose an amphitheater right here, we're kind of at the northern end of the lake to take advantage of the views of the lake as well as views of the mountain space, and you're at a point of the park that has some parking already. You can conceptualize an amphitheater that adds about 5,000 seats of outdoor music or event space in a pretty notable part of Escada at the Park. We certainly want to make sure that we're working with our Parks and Rec partners to make sure that they can have some good ideas about where the best place or location for an amphitheater would be. But you know, we certainly made sure that our consultants met with the Parks and Rec staff and also gained a good amount of knowledge from the master plan the department has created for improvements to Escada at the Park. Altogether, adding an amphitheater at Escada Park, including some parking improvements, would come to a little bit less than $25 million, so $24,320,000. That's the cost estimate. And here's what you can kind of understand in terms of projected attendance going forward 30 years. So the first few years, you're trying to build up some momentum, and you can kind of see that in year one. You get a total of 72,000 people, but that's really taking into account the way you can apply the space to different kinds of events, to include graduations, as well as focusing on concerts and festivals. So you can actually offer community groups access to the space so that they actually can have their events as well. Altogether, they project that by year 30, you could have as many as 92,000 people coming to the space, which is about what you gain pretty quickly by year 3. So you're not really having to worry about improvements going forward. Once you build this, it's just a matter of marketing it and getting more people familiar with coming to Escada Park for those events. This shows you the pro forma look at what adding an amphitheater would mean. Basically, you could generate annual revenue of $1 million in year 1 and increase revenues to $2.5 million by year 30. This shows you what that outlook provides us.
Michael, are these very conservative numbers?
Yes, they are. Yeah. They were generated before any kind of increase to percentage rates for borrowing and lending right now that have increased recently. So And here's a summary of the 30-year impact on what adding an amphitheater to Escada Park would look like. Shows you that you have new spending, but you also create jobs from adding the amphitheater as well. Just that project.
Really comprehensive.
So we wanted to present these high concept, this high concept information to you so that we can actually gain as much as we can from you about what your feedback is. Also to take what your questions are, see if we can generate some answers for you, but also just get some direction from you about what next steps you'd like to see from us in terms of perhaps improvements to the County Coliseum as well as adding an amphitheater at Escada Park. We also want to be mindful of what that improvement to the Bridge of the Americas would have as an impact, and we want to make sure that we have that information to you as we come back to you with some more detailed concepts. And we certainly want to basically understand what paying for certain improvements would look like. And so we are already engaging with our financial advisors about modeling for what options we have for financing these improvements, and we'll be able to present that to the court as well. But we certainly want to make sure that we took all your questions into account, heard from you any feedback that you had, and then came back to you with some of those answers for you.
Omar?
Yes, the information that we have regarding the amphitheater in Sunland Park, it's going to be expandable from 2,500 seating up to 7,500. It's going to be located, and they're already working on the land as we speak. It's right across the casino, so they have the casino as well, and they're getting a lot of funds from the city government of Sunland Park. And what they're very aware of the weather issues that we might expect over here. So take a look at Toyota Music Factory in Irving, Texas. It's going to be pretty much the same map, is the same plan as that building, where they have the ability of closing it in case there's bad weather and opening it with grass seating area outside of it. So so you have a better idea of what they're trying to do over there. And it's very concerning because it's from 2,500 seating, they're going to try to take away audience from the plaza and the Abraham Chavez, up to 6,000, 7,000, that's the Coliseum. And depending on the seating that you guys want to do over at Escarate, they're going to try to attack that one as well.
Well, it's a good benchmark.
So we're open to any other questions or any other feedback that you have for us, and we can come back with more details for you.
I think, first of all, that, thank you for the engagement. I think that, I feel very confident that Commissioners Court, that's our trademark of community engagement, making sure that people are participating, and I thank you for that. Sometimes everybody thinks it slows down the process, but it actually doesn't, because then when you get to a certain point, people are engaged in helping with that initiative and not trying to still figure out what's going to happen. So I think that's very important. I think the questions that we've said here, and to continue to look at that, I think we need to look at what's happening in the Sunland with their amphitheater, because it's a competition. I mean, I think we have to look at it from that perspective. It already is because of other factors, and drawing away from our venues is not good for our community. So I'm hoping that the private sector also gets engaged and tries to figure out. I mean, it's going to be an impact for them as well, like it is for any other. Having an amphitheater in El Paso versus Sunland, New Mexico, is going to impact our community. So I think that there should be some consideration from the private sector that this, what we're trying to accomplish is good for everybody, good for all of El Paso. I mean, just Escarate itself, I feel good. It's close enough to the rural areas that it becomes their park as well. It's not something way away from them. And so we're offering something to engage every point in our community with things like the amphitheater and Escarate and the Coliseum and all these things. We're not as far that it wouldn't be part of what they would gain from. So I think it's a great initiative for the community, but like I said, I do think that it's important that the community understands, their contribution and what is it that they could do from retail, to be able to look at retail opportunities for themselves there at Escarate, or retail opportunities around the Coliseum. So I think if we all come together as a community, this is going to be one of those turning points in our community that makes us at that level of being a destination and not a pass-through, where people just go right through and either headed to Dallas or headed to LA and don't give us that opportunity to see who we are. So I think there's going to be a huge contributor, and so I feel that we need to engage Destination El Paso, the Greater Chamber. By the way, good news, our previous economic development, Andrea Hutchins is now the chamber, the Greater Chamber CEO, which I think is going to help. She understands. I talked to her about the rural, think rural, don't forget us in the rural areas, and she understands the military component, and I think she's going to be a great partner for us. But so I think we need to engage everyone we can, Michael, on this ideas from the Hispanic Chamber, Greater Chamber, everyone else to say, how does that contribute to your strategic plan? How does we by doing this, how does that embrace and enhance your strategic plan, and then what do you do to contribute to this process? So as much as I see it as a county initiative, I think it's going to benefit everyone else, and I think we should look for opportunities. So we're always asked to contribute to the development of the downtown area and adding incentives to that, and maybe we could look at the opposite. What kind of incentives can we get from the city to help these developments become a reality? So,
Thank you, sir. And certainly our study was built upon that kind of engagement, not just with stakeholders, but the public, and we'll make sure that whatever steps we take forward will continue that engagement. We want to make sure that public feedback really does define some of the improvements that we're seeking for both places. And you're right. I think these are opportunities for not just the community to understand what those improvements could mean, but also the impact on small businesses and in the area in general. As Commissioner Stott pointed out, there are a lot of small businesses in the area that actually can gain from more activity at our venues. We wanted to make sure that we can connect with them about the relationship they have with our venues as well, so they can understand that whatever improvements we make it can help their business as well.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, Commissioner Holguín?
Thank you, Judge. I just wanted to make some comments from my perspective. We always, or the last few times that we've discussed this issue, we've discussed both things together, the improvements to the Coliseum as well as the amphitheater at Azcárate. From my perspective, I feel like our priority should be the Coliseum. I feel that we need to take care of the assets that we already have before we find ourselves trying to create new assets. So I think the amphitheater is a wonderful idea, but of course now with what we know is happening in Sunland Park, I just really feel like we need to concentrate on the Coliseum. To me, that would be our priority. Perhaps the amphitheater is something that we want to continue looking at as time goes by, but from my perspective, at the Coliseum, we have the ability to generate additional revenue, and I think that's what we need to focus on. The signage, the Sherman Barn, the second ice sheet, I mean, these are all things that could result in a very substantial increase in revenue, and I think that's where our focus should be. I mean, even looking at the financials, at the projections for the amphitheater, I think by year 30, the projection was, what, $89,000 in revenue? I'm not really sure if that's where if that should be a priority for us right now, especially considering what's happening in Sunland Park. And that's just my perspective. I would want us to focus on improving a really important asset to our community, which is the Coliseum.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Which reinforces my comment about maybe looking at the group that's trying to put that door structure and also the amphitheater, because that would offset. Because when I saw that, I said, man, that could really offset a huge expense for us. But I just want to know how real that is and what their idea is of an amphitheater. And their proposal is mostly binational. That they want binational to feel like they're helping out and creating that binational relationship with us. So it's quite a gesture. I just need to make sure, how valid or viable their proposal is.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Commissioner Stott?
I just wanted to say that Azcárate Park is one of our most valuable and existing assets. And, we have a parks master plan that also contemplates the amphitheater. It's an improvement to an already existing asset, and we're not building a new park. We're investing in what we have and making improvements there. So I just want to make that distinction. We have been asked to build new parks in many different areas, and we've done that. But this is an existing asset that does deserve attention that in an area that has not seen as much investment on behalf of the county as other areas have. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
And I'm not suggesting that Azcárate doesn't need also a lot of our attention. It certainly does. I think there's a lot of wonderful things that could be done at Azcárate, and I do think that it's one of our treasures. So I didn't want to suggest that at all. I was just thinking more in terms of prioritizing with the amount of spending that we're thinking of doing.
Commissioner Leon?
Yes, and as we move forward, Michael, I think what Omar brought up insofar as the walkability on the campus, but yet to leave enough room for, you mentioned something about some events that need just plain space, that's incorporated into the master plan also.
Yes, correct. And a perfect example is Grupo Firme coming again with that. They exploded so much to a point that now they're doing stadiums. They're doing Dallas Stadium in July, and then going to San Diego 2 weeks later. Well, El Paso is in the middle. we're talking to them to a point that we can see that the Coliseum is very small for them. Even the Don Haskins is very small for them. So we want to see if we can put them in the parking lot for 15,000 people. As an example.
Utilize every resource. Throw everything at them.
And now we said 15,000 and said, huh? And so they're looking into the possibility. I hope this is not very public because we want to leave this in the download.
It is public.
You guys needed to know that, just as an example of what we can do in the parking lot.
Thank you.
KVIA is right there.
There's one public figure there that. Noel, any other questions? If not, Michael, thank you very much. Great presentation. It's exciting, but I like how it's very comprehensive, especially the projections and what we're going to be looking at. I think that helps us tremendously to do what Commissioner Holguín is saying, is that the prioritize. I think we need to. Some part of it needs to say, these are some of the things that should come first before we get to other things, and I think that would give us a much better understanding.
Thank you so much for this discussion. We'll take back these questions and answer them and provide those answers and that additional information to the court as soon as we can.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Caesar?
With that, this concludes today's meeting.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned, and thank you, everybody. Like I said, pretty exciting topic, and we need that pivotal point for El Paso, so thank you. Thank you back there, our translators, thank you.
I forgot to
Miguel
acknowledge our
and-
translators today, Tamara Gastelum and Dario Garcia.
And Omar, when was the Coliseum, tell us again, when was it built?
1945. 1945. Let's try that again. 1945, and you say, with all due respect, Your Honor.
This concludes today's meeting at 10:51 a.m.